So I think, the sky's the limit on some of these capabilities. I think we in real-time payments are literally at the very beginning of how the capabilities will evolve. I mentioned our token product. Um, it's something we've been working on for a number of years. We've got a number of large banks involved in it. It's still not, the ubiquitous solution, and we're being very thoughtful about how we roll it out because we don't want to get over our skis.
This is Converge, a podcast from Convera. Come with us as we shape the future of finance.
All right, it is day 2 at Money2020, and we're back with the Converge Podcast here in the booth. I'm delighted to have a great start to the day. Margaret Weichert from Clearinghouse is with us. She's the Chief Product Officer there. And Peter Tapling is the Managing Director of PTap Advisory. We're super psyched to have both of you. Margaret, why don't we start with you? You're the Chief Product Officer at the Clearinghouse. You're responsible for almost $2 trillion in daily transfers there. What was your path to this significant role? And tell us a little bit about your day-to-day at the Clearinghouse, if you don't mind.
Sure thing. So first of all, great to be here. My path to my current role was a little bit long and winding, so I won't go into all of that. But what I will say is that I've always been fascinated with payments as the moment of truth in every transaction, exchanging goods and services. So it's in some ways one of the most human parts of financial services. Mm-hmm. And I have worked in product roles. I've worked in P&L roles. I've worked across all the different payment types. Mm-hmm. And to me, the role I have now is the perfect capstone of a career focused on customers and customer payments. Mm. The payment types we have reflect, what are central payments for both large corporates, government payments, businesses, both large and small, as well as consumers. And, I've got some historically traditional payments, including image check clearing, all the way up to the latest, newest instant payment in our RTP product.
Yeah, a really interesting span of experience and products there. Peter, your advisory business is focused on technology translation for businesses with a specific focus on payments. What kind of businesses do you work with? And what about your background that led you to this type of career and role?
Yeah, I'll take the second part first. Thank you for having me. I'm a technology guy by training. I've been building products for 30 to 40 years. And it turned out that many of the products that I was working with had some element of payments or identity or risk in them. Mm-hmm. And so when, I had a particular product that was being sold to payment service providers and financial institutions, I spent an enormous amount of time trying to understand my customer, right? So trying to understand how do these payment networks work. So that's kind of the background. Today, after, spent some great time with one of the, I guess it's a network. Do we call Zelle a network? I don't know.
Yeah,
I spent some time with Early Warning, where I was working very directly as a network. And so in the consulting business, I lean in that technology background that I understand how everything works, mm-hmm. and I understand the payment networks. And you picked up the phrase technology translation. Mm-hmm. Every CIO in any bank has gotten the sales pitch that talks about the cloud-based Kubernetes, API-driven big data, whatever, and they don't have any of those problems. So I help providers when they're trying to create messaging for financial institutions around identity, fraud, risk, payments. And I work with financial institutions to help them understand the technologies that they're buying.
Great. I know that you both appeared together on a panel yesterday. It was about how the networks are encouraging the industry to build applications that deliver the value of faster and instant payments to end users. Margaret, what have you been doing at the Clearinghouse specifically, if you don't mind sharing, to enable that to happen?
Sure. So we really want to work with the banks who are direct clients, as well as their clients, many of whom are fintechs, to help figure out how do we use the rails that we provide to solve customer problems?
Yeah.
And so, we really want to understand what that customer problem is. We're not trying to sell a rail or a specific technology. We want to understand the flow and what the ideal way of moving the money and doing that as seamlessly as possible. So we work, it's actually great to be here at Money 2020. We were just meeting with a client's client talking about, how do we make account to account transfers easier for financial institutions who aren't necessarily retail financial institutions. They're, brokerage firms. And we're going to leverage thinking around tokenization and other capabilities that we have above and beyond the core rails to make it seamless and make it work very well.
That's great. And we'll dive into that a little bit more, I'm sure. Peter, can you share your experience on working with payment networks, both established and emerging?
Yeah, so as an independent consultant, I wouldn't say outside looking in, but I am a conduit for information that they want to get out to their customers in the industry. I do a ton of education. You talked about the panel that we had yesterday. I have spoken with and alongside and educated on the clearinghouse's RTP network, the FedNow network from the Federal Reserve, NACHA, ACH, same day ACH. So, I've found that the networks are very good at reaching out to people who can help educate, who can help drive interest in. And, we talked earlier about what I help people do. One of the things I help people do is I help them understand how they would use these technologies. And that's true of a network as well. It's easy to paint a broad brush and say, oh, if I sign up for the clearinghouse RTP network, I have to offer this new brand of payment to everybody for every purpose. And that's generally not how it works. Yeah. It comes to market as part of a product.
Yeah. Margaret, can you give us some specific examples of the new types of applications that really excite you and how they might benefit U.S. consumers and businesses?
So there are a number of places where I think fintechs do a great job of really understanding the end customer use case. And so there are applications that we're working with in earned wage access, where there are companies who are really focused on how to allow employers to pay people in real time. So that's an area we're spending a lot of time on. We're working with insurance companies and a lot of the insurtech players who are thinking about how do you make business to consumer disbursements, claims payments, things like that, more real time. So really there's just a host of things I mentioned, tokenization around payments in the wealth space and asset management space. So there's any number of things, and just walking around the floor here at Money 2020, I can come up with like 10 more ideas.
Yeah, sure. And that early wage access, same day wage access is a great example of a payment type that definitely derives value from the characteristics of an instant payment. Things like insurance, we have a bunch of choices. It becomes another choice. One of my quippish phrases is I always ask people, do you want your money now or do you want your money later? Everyone will answer that question exactly the same way.
I wonder what they answered. Yeah.
Well, and the other thing I would say, though, is there's a value proposition to the insurer because moving the liability off their books doesn't work the same way in ACH as it does in check and in real-time payments. So there's actually a value proposition on both sides in that example that I really am excited about.
Yeah. From your perspective, Peter, what are the really critical features and functionalities that these applications need to have to drive that user adoption and satisfaction that comes from really an ideal customer experience that's easy and seamless and functional?
Yeah. Well, I think around the world, the instant payment schemes have come to market because over time, consumers have begun to learn what the internet is about and what mobile experience is about. And they want instant. I want to hit a button and have something happen. Yep. In order to get that with money movement, which Margaret correctly said, that's like a very personal thing in everyone's life. In order to do that with money movement, they took money out of financial institutions and put them in other ecosystems, right? And so for financial institutions to remain central to the lives of their customers and the operations of their business customers, they really need to be able to support that instant experience, right? When I want money to move, I want it to move now. I've spoken with some business customers and they say, well, I don't want to pay faster because I love float. And, that's where we really talk about, it's not about faster all the time. Sometimes it's about precision.
Mm-hmm.
I want this to get paid exactly when the goods get moved from the ship to the truck. That's when I want the payment to happen. And so kind of more generally, to answer your question, I think for financial institutions particularly, all you need to do is put the headset on and listen alongside in the call center for about 2 hours. And you're going to hear customers talk about a bunch of problems. I sent a payment. It's out of my account. It's not in their account. I need to get money moved tonight so that it's available for tomorrow. They're not asking for an instant payment, but instant payment addresses the payment problems that they're having.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned the precision versus speed being important. That, of course, brings to mind, we also talked about tokenization. I want to talk a little bit more about that because programmability that's inherently possible with digitization of money and tokenization is really interesting. What are your thoughts on the movement towards adopting some of those use cases? I know, Citi, for example, spoke with us last year on the podcast about how in the maritime trade, they're already seeing, a use case where, a ship will pass through the canal and a smart contract will enable that payment to happen right on time when everyone expects it to happen and much more seamlessly than in the past and obviously automated. What are you seeing in terms of progress here and what's exciting you in that realm a little bit more?
So I think, the sky's the limit on some of these capabilities. I think we, in real-time payments, are literally at the very beginning of how the capabilities will evolve. I mentioned our token product. It's it's something we've been working on for a number of years. We've got a number of large banks involved in it. It's still not, the ubiquitous solution, and we're being very thoughtful about how we roll it out because we don't want to get over our skis.
Yep.
But I do think, just what happened here at the conference, we discover the use cases for the technology, and then we're going to implement them in that way as appropriate, rather than doing if you build it, they will come, massive, will be all things to all people. We want to have, architecture that enables that expansion of use cases, but start with ones that are really proven, have a high amount of need for a broad number of customers.
And I think it's important when we throw out the word tokenization that we understand exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So the tokenization product that the clearinghouse offers protects account information. It makes sure that account information can't be reused. That's separate from the trade finance smart contract thing where real world assets are being tokenized onto some sort of distributed ledger where they have programmatic capability, et cetera, et cetera. So I almost wish we would have a different word for those two things.
Yeah, it's a good point. There's certainly a fine line between some of these. So talk about just what are the incentives or support that banks and fintechs will need to move in the right direction to adopt some of these applications and technologies. How can you incentivize them in a positive way? And what are you doing as a consultant or at the clearinghouse to sort of spur the movement in the right direction?
So I think that the thing we do at the network level, and it's probably useful to mention, we, the clearinghouse, are a not-for-profit private sector entity. And so one of our reasons for being is to create economic utility in the form of efficiency. So we're looking to create very low cost optionality for the players who want to use our solution. And as we get more volume, as we get essentially more economic contribution, we can pass that back through the network. So there's an inherent incentive, even in our governance model, to get more volume on our network. In addition to that, we're spending a lot of time working with technology service providers that can bring large numbers of players to the table, whether it's on the bank side.
Yeah.
A lot of people think of us as a big bank player, but we have 700 banks, 90% of whom are very, very small banks on the real-time payment network. And we have, great relationships with third-party service providers that essentially operate the online banking capabilities for those players. So we work with those third parties as well as with the end customers.
Right. Makes sense.
I think there's two, you look at it from two directions. One's the financial institution direction. What's the financial institution's motivation to participate?
Yeah.
And if you look at the landscape of financial institutions in the United States, we have something on the order of 9,400 banks and credit unions today. 10 years ago, we had 25,000, right? And so for community financial institutions, they need to remain relevant. They need to figure out, how do I get Gen Z, Gen Y, Gen Alpha coming up? How do I get them to want to put their money in the bank and get the services that they expect? Now, it turns out that particularly community banks have a hard time building products that have reach beyond their community. And so that's where partnerships come in. So partnering with products, fintech products, half the things on this floor that are, the fintech wants differentiation. They want to be able to say, I can do something that other people can't do, right?
Yeah.
So in the early days of the adoption of the network, it's that differentiator. I can do it, other people can't.
Yeah.
As the networks evolve and as the networks gain, move towards ubiquity, it's going to be something that it becomes an option. It's like, if you need the characteristics of this payment, then there's a payment type, right?
Yeah.
And so, like I said, I think I'm hopeful that 10 years from now, the default payment type is an instant payment, and you use the other payments for something else, right? Because again, do you want your money now or do you want your money later?
Yeah. Yeah. Margaret, you mentioned the nonprofit status of the clearinghouse. It's owned by some of the world's largest commercial banks. How does that impact your approach to developing, a new real-time payment system? The fact that there's that ownership from the banks, and that you're really sort of working in the interest of your owners.
Yeah. So what our reason for being is to do things that the industry would not do as well on their own.
Mm-hmm.
And developing, the first new payment rail in the United States in probably 40 years, it's not something that any one institution can do on their own.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not even something that the collection of our owner banks can do on their own. To meet the challenge of a two-sided market, we really need to be able to serve all of the parties in the banking system. So there's an element of what our owners are trying to achieve that influences where we focus our activities. But once they've said, okay, we need this new thing, the RTP capability, we're really more focused on clients and customers and end-to-end solutions than we are on just, our owners, because our owners are only a piece of solving that two-sided market problem. So we use a framework, the pragmatic marketing framework, that really is very customer-centric. And we need to understand payers and payees. We want it to be very use case focused. And there may be large banks on some side of these transactions and small banks on the other. We need to think through all of that and identify what are those use cases where we can lift both sides at the same time.
Interesting. Just to talk a little bit about the technology and where it's going. Obviously, everybody's speculating on how AI might become a very important and integral part of shaping the future of payments, quantum computing as well. What are your thoughts about these new technologies and their impact? If you put your futurist hat on for a bit and just give us your thoughts on what you think might be the role that they might play in the future financial system. Peter, you want to start?
Like most hot technologies, they provide a capability, they offer a service, right? So for instance, if we take AI, we've been using AI in payments for 35 years, right? ChatGPT comes out November 2022. I call that the app for that moment for AI, because AI became something that was accessible by an individual.
Yeah.
So when we look at generative AI, the stuff around, ChatGPT and Gemini and Copilot, that will be used probably not in the stream of the payment, but in customer service, in answering questions, things like that. There's a great use case for one of the fintechs that's on the floor here, where they had to do customer service in 37 different languages. And so it was kind of spotty depending on the language that you were getting, because it's hard to train people in that many languages. And AI was a great answer to that problem. On the quantum side, again, like most things, quantum can be used for good or for bad. It's already being used today in certain markets for figuring the throughput of payments within the high value systems, so that I clear the deposits before I clear the debits out, right, or the credits out. So it's already being used in some of those ways. There's a lot of attention on quantum and the threat that quantum presents to payments. We rely a ton on encryption in the payments ecosystem, in a whole variety of connections and data storage and things like that. And it turns out that one of the problems that quantum is really good at solving is guessing cryptographic keys for asymmetric algorithms. And so NIST just came out with a series of algorithms that they've approved that are quantum safe. But in order to implement those, that's a 5 or a 10-year effort, and it has to be done on both sides of a transaction. And so that's the kind of thing that needs to start now. There's actually a phrase, Y2Q, which is the year in which quantum computing becomes practical enough to actually break these cryptographic keys at scale. And that's anywhere between 2027 and 2035.
Wow.
2027 is pretty darn
Pretty
close.
soon, yeah. Did you want to chime in, Margaret?
Yeah, sure. So, picking up on the quantum, I think from our standpoint, there are a lot of people looking at the question around encryption. So I'm not going to comment on that. What I can say is the place where we view the most opportunity for some of these technologies is in fraud and risk management, because the goal really is to identify signal from noise. Whether you're talking about deepfake technology, whether you're talking about phishing, spoofing, all the ways people are compromised, really trying to understand in a very rich way what customer behavior looks like. Even though, like I had an example yesterday, I don't often go to Vegas. I might go to Vegas, once a year. And when I'm in Vegas, do I have a pattern of buying rare books? No, I do not have a pattern of buying rare books. At some point in the future, Bank of America they're my bank, might be able to determine that the purchase I made yesterday actually fits my profile and remove the friction from that experience. But as it stood today, like the best way to stop that problem was to involve me, in a 2-factor authentication kind of mode.
Yeah.
Going forward, I think AI has a lot of opportunity to really separate signal from noise.
Yeah. And I mean, you could see it today. Anybody listening to this podcast can see the use of AI for fraudulent purposes. We've all gotten the emails or the text messages that say, hey, I have a prince from a foreign country that wants to send you $30 million, but first give me your bank account. The content of those phishing emails is perfect these days. It used to not be very perfect. And now I'm really curious what book Margaret bought, but that's off podcast.
Magna Carta.
Oh, look at
it's not an original Magna
I was
Carta,
gonna
but
say,
it was a
early
1600.
Wow.
Awesome.
That's an impressive find. That's great. You have your annual conference coming up at the Clearinghouse, Margaret, and I think it's next month. What can you tell us, our listeners, what to expect from that event, and what's the key message that you want to leave with your audience regarding the future of payments when you walk away from that conference, or sort of overall overarching theme that you're looking to convey?
Yeah. So we're looking at really customer in the center, customer control in the context of a rapidly changing regulatory landscape. So the conference probably has a higher content level on the regulatory legal side than some conferences. because that is a critical part of shaping, the operating guardrails of the system as we evolve it. At the same time, and the part that I'm most excited about is really bringing together, the banks who are in the middle of these payment transactions with their customers, their clients. So I'm going to be on a panel with a leader who's been leading payments, at Walgreens and Disney and Starbucks, alongside, technology players and a couple of bankers who are really focused on customer experience at Truist and Bank of America. And that kind of conversation to me about customer centricity and payments is what I'm most excited about.
That sounds great. Peter, let's talk about open banking for a second. Given that you have a depth of experience with the U.S. Banking system, what role do you see open banking playing in the evolution of faster payments and the future of payments, especially given the recent rule being enacted?
Yeah. So the phrase open banking has been a little bit purloined here in the United States. Over in Europe and the UK, it's been very structured for many years. I think the purpose of the rule, the intent of the rule, is to bring some of that structure to the United States. Whether or not it does that and in what time frame it does that, time will tell. That said, I think that the concept that a financial institution needs to be more flexible in how they provide information and access to services for their customers is a no-brainer. That has become table stakes. You have to be able to do that. It would be easier to do that if there were a standard so that I don't have to write different APIs for different providers, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think we're not even at the beginning of a journey. We've been doing forms of this in the United States for well over a dozen years, but it's been very fragmented. And so it creates very different customer experiences depending on where you experience it. And customers are more apt to do things that are consistent, and they understand how they work from the way their friends did it. It's a lesson that we learned with Zelle. We put an enormous amount of effort into making the experience of sending a payment exactly the same, regardless of where you were and where you banked. And that's worked. We've seen the success of the Zelle network. And so, again, I'm hopeful, putting crystal ball time, I'm hopeful that when we go out 5 years, 7 years, that we have a lot more seamless experiences in the ways that I use services from my financial institution.
Yeah. Although I would push back a little bit, when I look at seamless, innovative experiences that are, customer in the middle, I would argue the United States leads in that innovative category, despite a lot of the, I wouldn't even say friction. I would say, the innovators create the use cases that actually work and make economic sense. It's not the standard leading the charge. It's the customer and the customer need.
Yep. Well said. So I guess on that note, to conclude things here, what advice would you give to those developers, those entrepreneurs who are building these solutions in the real-time payment space, if you just had to give one top piece of advice to close out our conversation?
I would say really understand the customer needs, not just the possibility of technology, but what is different if you apply technology to a customer problem.
So I was going to jump in first because I knew Margaret was going to say that.
That's
what
yours.
I was going to say. I was going to say, focus on the customer, focus on the customer, focus on the customer. Some of the most successful companies that you see here come from someone who was in some kind of environment and they had a particular problem and they said, oh, that stinks. We want to go ahead and fix that problem. And the history of successful startups is paved with exactly that kind of story, right? Yeah. So, as I said very early in the podcast, instant payments is a tool. It's a really cool tool. It does some great things. Do you want your money now or do you want your money later? But building a capability that says, oh, look, you can do an instant payment now doesn't really matter to a customer. The customer wants to solve a problem that they have.
That was a great note to end on. Peter, Margaret, thanks so much for being here. It was a pleasure to chat with you, and I hope to connect with you again next time.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Take care.